Hey everyone, welcome to another edition of Sports Talk New York, the Facebook Live edition. We are thrilled today because, as you know, we've been doing a couple of these theme shows, whether it be the Slapshot movie or the Bad News Bears movie. Yesterday we did one on the trade. Today we're doing one on the 1969 Miracle Mets, one that all of us, basically can trace our Met fandom back to. That was an amazing time. And joining us on the show is a man who played 8 years in the majors after 3 seasons with the Cincinnati Reds. He was traded to the New York Mets in the winter of 1967. It was a major part of the Miracle Mets that won the 1969 World Championship, defeating the Baltimore Orioles. During the magical championship season, he batted .300, led the Mets in the National League playoffs, batting .538 versus the Atlanta Braves, 7 hits on 13 at-bats. As I have said many times and even documented in AJ and my book, Glove Story, without a doubt, my Mets fandom can be traced directly to the 5th inning of August 3rd, 1968. It's his grand slam off Nelson Briles in the first game I ever attended at Shea Stadium. Instantly had me hooked. It's a thrill to welcome number 24, Art Shamsky, to our Facebook Live edition of Sports Talk New York. He is also the co-author of After the Miracle, The Lasting Brotherhood of the 1969 Mets. Welcome, Art.
It's great to be here, Mark. Thank you for inviting me.
I think we just lost. Oh, there we go. Now we got.
I'm back.
It's actually our pleasure. Joining him is another friend of the show, frequent guest as well, prolific writer. Art actually commented that all those books behind him have been written by him. He wrote the acclaimed King of Queens, Life Beyond Baseball with the '86 Mets, also co-authored of highly acclaimed baseball autobiographies, At Home with Glenn Burke, A Pirate for Life with Steve Blass, the New York Times bestseller Mookie, My Life in Baseball and the '86 Mets, and Davey Johnson, My Wild Ride in Baseball and Beyond. He's an annual lecturer at the National Baseball Hall of Fame in Cooperstown. He co-authored After the Miracle with Art, The Lasting Brotherhood of the 1969 Mets. It is a pleasure to also welcome him back to Sports Talk New York, the first time on our Facebook Live edition. How you doing, Eric?
Good. How are you, Mark?
We're doing good. We're doing the best we can. AJ and I are trying to keep busy. And these Facebook Live shows that we've been doing are pretty cool because it actually gives people the ability while we're on to comment and ask questions as well. So we really like that as well. The reason why you guys are together on this phone, obviously, is the amazing book that you guys have written, After the Miracle. And it's just... for those of us that lived the time, it brings us back. But the question is, obviously, there have been so many books written about the 1969 Mets. And I have to imagine, and Art, you did one before about the entire year of 1969, the New York landscape with the Knicks and the Jets as well. How difficult is it going back to a subject matter that so many people have written about? Every Met fan that is a fan of that 69 team has probably read every book. How difficult is it to bring new light to a year that probably every single person knows every moment of that season?
Well, really the 50th anniversary, which was last year, was really the cornerstone for it. And when we sat down, Eric and myself, and talked about it, we understood that there had been so many books written about that team, probably more than any other sports team in the history of sports, and we wanted to do something different. And Eric and I just would discuss it, and Eric came up with the idea. Well, maybe we're going to interview all the players. Maybe we need to take a trip out to California and interview Tom Seaver. Of course, was the biggest name on that team, and rightfully so. We didn't want to do an interview with him over the phone. And seeing him in person was important to us. And so that really was the basis of the book, the idea to write about this camaraderie that we had 50 years later that still exists with the players who are still around. And really just that trip out there was really the catalyst to get us going. And so we wanted to do something different. And that really was really the real one main thing that we wanted to do.
So looking...
Yeah.
Okay, so
go ahead, AJ.
Last year, obviously, said there was a news peg. There was the 50th anniversary. And last year, there were a lot of activities that went on. There was at Shea Stadium, elsewhere, celebrating the 50th anniversary. So in year 51, has that carried through? What goes on? Do things, have things lasted this year as you go into this year, 1 year past that?
Well, on a personal level, I'm just thankful that the anniversary wasn't this year, and it was last year, because if it was this year, obviously it would have been canceled, and we'd be in some trouble right now. It's an awful time in this country and the world with what's going on, and so it's hard to really get into the good things about the '69 Mets when so much bad stuff is going on. But the thing about it is, and I think Erik will agree with me, that team resonates with people who weren't even born, who know about that team from their parents and their grandparents. There's a magnetism about that team. There's a legacy that's been passed on about that team, and I think it really is due to the fact that everybody remembers the names, and it wasn't just about Tom Seaver or Jerry Koosman or Cleon Jones or Tommy Agee. It's about Kenny Boswell and Wayne Garrett and Ed Charles, and I can go on with all the names of the team. And I think that's what really makes me very proud to have been part of it, because it really is about all these guys who contributed to the success of the team. And I think it'll just keep going on. I mean, maybe there'll be a 75th anniversary, who knows, but the reality of it is it was so special last year. And I think Erik, who really understands Met history and knows about Met history, kind of really found out about how important that team was and how loved by everybody that team is. And when he was with us when we went out to see Tom with Jerry Koosman and Ron Swoboda and Bud Harrelson, I think he really got the feeling about how close we were and how important it was to write about that team 50 years later. And I think it was a real eye-awakening thing for him, because I know he knows Met history, but I really think he saw how close the team was and how important it was for all of us to be part of that team. And, we're still reaping the benefits of being part of that team 51 years now later. And I don't mean monetarily. I mean just the fact that we are able to say we're part of that team. I played 13 years and for all intents and purposes, nobody ever talks about the other 12. It's really about 1969. And I understand that, particularly with Met fans and New York people, and I understand that, but it's so important for me to be able to say I was part of that team, because no matter what else I did in my career, you're really known for having been part of that World Championship 1969 Met team.
Well, to that end, obviously, that 1969 team had an effect on so many people, and just the way we lived through that, no matter what your age is. You take a look, you've made it into popular culture on a hit TV show, and, Raymond's dog's name is Shamsky. And obviously that's because of Ray Romano's love. Well,
it's funny because, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but it just, what happens is when I go out and speak and talk to people or meet people, I get the usual questions. Who was the toughest pitcher? Should Pete Rose be in the Hall of Fame because I came up with Cincinnati and Pete and I were teammates? And usually the third or fourth question is, how does it feel to have a dog named after you when everyone loves Raymond? So that in itself is something that just carries on. And with the reruns and everything that goes on with that show, people still see it and talk about it. So, it's kept my name out there, kept me, although I'm not sure that Bulldog and myself, that ugly bulldog is something to be very happy about. But the reality of it is such a great show, and people remember it, and I still get questions about it. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, Mark, but
that's the gist of it. That's exactly it. So it's interesting because you also alluded to the fact that Erik is knows Met history. So Erik, one of the cool things about After the Miracle is getting to see the bond those players have created, and having gone through the process of tracking down and talking to the 1979 Rangers for my Ranger book. I know it's a huge thrill once you get inside and you talk to them, but you've interviewed so many other athletes for all your other books. But I have to imagine sitting at a table with Bud Harrelson, Ron Swoboda, Tom Seaver, Jerry Koosman, and Art was pretty special. What was your takeaway of getting them all together? I know logistically it was a nightmare and you chronicle that, but when you actually got together and they started talking baseball, how did it differ from some of your other projects, whether you went one-on-one with someone or did a phone interview?
Well, it differed in part because of what you just touched on. There were so many hurdles. There were so many things that could have gone wrong, which could have derailed that weekend. I mean, right up until that very Saturday morning when we went to see Tom out on his vineyard, and then we had lunch with him afterwards with the guys. I mean, right up until that point, we weren't sure if it was going to happen. And usually when you fly 3,000 miles, I mean, all your ducks are in a row. You know, you're ready to go. And with this, it was just, you know, this has to break right. You know, Buddy's got to be feeling up to it. You know, Buddy Harrelson. Rocky's wife was going through some serious medical issues around that time. He was also broadcasting baseball games, which we had to work around. Then there was probably a list Art would know, 35 or 40 other factors that could have derailed this reunion. But what really, I think, was the strength behind it was the fact that Art stays in touch with all of his 69 teammates on a regular basis. And that was the thing that really struck me while we were writing the book. There was never a case, whether it was Tom Seaver or if it was Al Weiss, you know, the first guy, or, you know, maybe the 15th guy or the 25th guy on the team, where any one of them ever said, "Boy, Art, it's been a long time. How have you been?" It was never like that. He keeps tabs on his teammates, and I think being out there with, you know, Koosman, Harrelson, Rocky, and Art, and just observing how really no time seemingly had passed. They were still telling the same jokes, still talking with each other just as they would have in the locker rooms back in '69. And so those were the things that were different for me. And it was a surreal experience. Obviously, I've been following the Mets my entire life and rooting for them my entire life. But it was surreal, but I was just so focused on the project that I was never anxious or nervous. And the guys made me feel like one of them. I mean, they're just a great group of guys. And, you know, I still keep in touch with a lot of them since we did the book.
You know, what's really too interesting too, AJ and Mark, is that we could have taken any 3 or 4 guys out there, and I think it would have been almost the same. We wanted to take Buddy because Buddy had just announced that he was in early stages of Alzheimer's, and him and Tom had been roommates, and both from California. So we both thought, Erik and I thought it would be therapeutic to get Buddy out there and be nice for him to reminisce, and that was great. And then Swoboda and Koosman were almost perfect because Swoboda had made the great catch when Tom was pitching in the World Series, and Koosman was the second best pitcher on the team. But more importantly, those two guys are so different politically and so opposed to each other in terms of political things that I knew that I could get them going by just agitating a little bit. And so I thought that would be important to get those guys going. And Erik, remember when we had breakfast at that place, and just having those guys around and I don't know, it just fell into place. It was just, we were very lucky that everything fell into place. And Erik is a brilliant writer and was able to get the feel of the camaraderie. And I think that's what resonated in the book and came through. And I think that's what I've had so many people come up to me and said they were almost in tears reading it about the reunion and going out there and everything. And so were we. We were all caught up in the emotion of spending time with Tom and that wonderful time in that beautiful area up there in Napa, California. It was just wonderful. And as Erik said, we were so lucky that he was feeling good or okay that day, because he could have just as easily got up and not felt good, and then we would have been really in trouble because we had to come back early the next day, and people had to get connecting flights, et cetera, et cetera. So, somebody was watching over us that weekend and worked out. And again, Erik's brilliant writing put it all down. And I think people who have read the book and heard about it and know about it, it wasn't just a book about somebody got a base hit to score a run and we won the game. It's about feelings 50 years later and how close we've remained. And I think one of the important things to touch on is that one of the beauties of us having won that year was not so much that we were expected to win, but we came from nowhere. the 68 Mets, my first year there, were not a very good team. We finished ninth, a half game out of last place. The early years of the Mets were just awful. And so for us to turn it around and win it all at a time that was really upside down in this country, and much like it is now, but the war in Vietnam was tearing us apart, and there were so many problems in the city of New York. And so what we did, and the Jets did it too, and the Knicks did it too in that year of 69, 70. But we made people feel better about their lives, and Erik touched on it and talked about the camaraderie, and I think that's really what the beauty of the book is.
If I
so
can
you mentioned, go ahead, AJ.
Question. You mentioned camaraderie. You've kept touch with everybody. If you feel comfortable, have you kept touch with Buddy, with Tom Seaver, with his family? Is there anything you can give our people watching, any update on how they're doing?
Well, in Buddy's case, I actually talked to his ex-wife, Kim, and he was in the car, and she picked up, and I just wanted to check on him. And he kind of said hello to me, and that was the extent of it. But she said he was seemed to be doing okay, and that was good news. I'm sure he's deteriorated to some degree, but hopefully it's still a point where he's able to get through the days and be okay. But he's got great family watching over him, and I think that's really helped him. In Tom's case, I haven't talked to him in a while, and I've tried to get some information from some of the Met people that I talked to, and they haven't got any information. So I'm only hoping that he's okay, and they're just kind of not letting him do personal appearances and doing interviews and things. But I really don't know how he's doing.
For those of you that are just joining us, evidently Ron had some issues today, so I don't believe he is going to be joining us. You can throw some questions in the chat room. We are monitoring that. Not the chat room, actually, comments on the stream. We'll see that, and we can ask them of both Erik and Art. Art, you mentioned that it could have been any guy that came in, and the feeling would have been the same. And the fact that you keep in touch with all of them, even know that you keep in touch with all of them. I know for Erik, it's a huge thrill when he's sitting at that table watching these stories. As these stories are unfolding and they're telling these various different stories, was there ever a point where you just leaned back and said, yeah, what I did here, it's pretty cool?
Well, it's always cool to talk about when you win a World Series. It's always there's nothing bad about that. But it was such a great group of guys, and unfortunately we've lost 10 or 11 of them, and starting with Gil Hodges, who died at such a young age in 1972. But we had great players on that team, not only as ball players, but just teammates and guys who passed away at an early age, like Cal Kuntz and Don Cardwell and Don Clendenin. All of them had contributed to the success of that team, and just being around them. And I think one of the guys who is no longer with us, I think Erik really got a fondness for, and really kind of felt the closest to the team, and that was Ed Charles, because Eddie really was the glue in the locker room. He was a guy that you had an 0 for 4, he would put his arm around you and make you feel like it wasn't the end of the world. And he was a guy that calmed everybody down. We had some guys who were all over the place, the Kuzmans of the world, the Tug McGraws, Don Clendenins. I mean, we had a locker room that was really loud and boisterous, but Ed Charles was the calming force of that team. And I think when Erik and I interviewed him, went to his house in Queens, I think Erik got a feel for how gentle the guy was, how kind he was, not only a great ball player, but a philosopher. And he really was the guy that kind of held the glue together in that locker room. So everybody on that team contributed, as I said before, and we had a great cast of characters. I mean, you can't talk about the characters on that team if you don't mention Tug McGraw, who was a real character. And Tug pitched great that year, and Jim McAndrew, there's another name out there, and a guy who never really got the credit for pitching great. And I know you're going to think I'm going to say Nolan Ryan, but I'm talking about Ron Taylor. Ron Taylor was a short relief pitcher on that team and did pitch great in the playoffs and the World Series, and never got the credit that he deserved, but was this low-key guy who was a very studious guy, got out of baseball, went back to school, became a doctor, and was a team physician for the Toronto Blue Jays for 35 years. So we had this group of guys who were from different every locker room has got different guys, but this group of guys who came from nowhere, and I mean came from nowhere in terms of a team, but just were just a group of guys that because we had been so bad the year before and then win it all the next year made it that much more special. And again, the memories for me are so vivid in my mind. I can think of things that happened that are so special. And that particular year, as Erik can verify, and you guys know, that there was so many crazy things that happened. So many things like the Steve Carlton game where he struck out 19, the no-hitter by Bob Moose, and I made the last out of that game. The Black Cat, the doubleheader we won in Pittsburgh, 1-0 both games, where Don Cardwell and Jerry Kuzman drove in the winning runs. I mean, there's so many games that year that are so significant that there's never a lack of conversation to talk about. It's not just that we won, but there's so many things that happen during the course of the year that make it so special.
One of the guys, you talk about the glue of that team, and it's unfortunate, you mentioned it's a good thing that the 69 reunion wasn't this year because it wouldn't have taken place. But this year the Mets were retiring Jerry Kuzman's number, and Jerry is a huge practical joker. And so I can imagine, stories of some of the things. I know one of the stories he told me for my KINER'S Corner book, which was unbelievable what he did during, it probably was that year with the Magic Mike and the microphone. You know that story, right, Art?
The Magic Mike,
the Tom Seaver fake trade.
Oh yeah, with the radio. Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So do you want to tell that?
Erik is better at telling that than me.
Erik, tell that story, because Jerry told me that story, and it was just hearing the joy all those years later, telling that story over the phone to me when he came back on KINER'S Corner and he actually told Tom about it, was hysterical. But tell our audience about what he actually did.
Yeah, no, that's in our book too.
Right.
So basically, it would have been around 1975. So a couple of years before Tom got traded. Jerry Kuz would read spy magazines. So in the back of the spy magazine, there was an ad for this shortwave radio system where, so you could basically be in one room and go on like a broadcaster and have it pipe into a radio in the next room. So he thought, well, this is a recipe for some great comedy. So what he did was he had somebody in the Mets organization, I forget who, but
it was Jack Simon, the producer of KINER'S Corner, actually.
Okay. And apparently Jack did a really dead-on Howard Cosell impression. So he had Jack in the trainer's room, and so Kuzman had his radio in his locker, and so they timed it so Kuzman would be right near Jerry. So Kuz turns up the radio, and Jack goes, "This is Howard Cosell. Big news out of New York today. Doug Rader is coming to New York in exchange for Tom Seaver and Ed Kranepool," and it was believable to an extent because the Mets needed a third baseman, and there were some contract disputes with Seaver, I think, around that time already, and Kuz thought for sure, the way he tells the story anyway, that he had Seaver and Kuzman completely fooled, like had them hook, line, and sinker, and Crane was outwardly upset about it, like slamming his locker, and whereas Tom was more reserved and just kind of like mellow about it, and so obviously within a few minutes they realized someone was playing a practical joke, but Kuz kept that quiet. And the culprit was never revealed until he went on KINER'S Corners on that first matchup that Kuzman and Seaver had against each other late in '77, and they're both on KINER'S Corner, and so Kuzman's telling the story to KINER, and Seaver's off camera listening to all this, and he's just mouthing like a sailor, like everything you can imagine. When he realized for the first time after a couple of years that it was Kuzman that was playing that trick on him, and so it's a great story, and Kuz tells it so much better. But that was the gist of it.
So we have a
It's a
couple
great
of
story.
comments in the comment section, questions, requests. So Mark Mandela says, "Can you please tell us the story about the Cleon Jones scuffed ball?" Art, Erik?
Well, that is a question that I'm not sure we can really answer. Although Kuzman says he's the one that scuffed it, we're not sure if that really happened. I think the ball actually hit him, and he just didn't want to go to first base because, in his words, he wanted to hit off Dave McNally. But who knows? It's such a controversial moment in the World Series. I was at the end of the bench, the other end of the bench, and I didn't see what happened. But the ball went into supposedly hit Jones. Cleon rolled into the Met dugout. Gil somehow got the ball, walked out to the umpire, showed him the scuff on the ball, and he said, "Okay, you have first base." But Cleon, for whatever reason, didn't run right away when the ball hit him, and he says to this day that he wanted to hit, but and Clendenin was on deck, and then he hit the home run, and then everything fell into place. But I wasn't there. I was there, but I don't have firsthand information. There's been some different stories I've heard from that other end of the bench that I'm not really sure about.
So another question came up from David Weiss saying, "Can anybody have seen the impact Al Weiss would have played in the '69 World Series?"
Erik, you want to take that?
Erik? I'm sorry, could you repeat that real quick?
About Al
It's on the
Weiss.
screen right now. It's about Al Weiss, the impact he had on that '69 World Series.
Well, he was a veteran player on a young team, and I think more than any player on that team, he exemplified the underdog persona that was the '69 Mets. Like we can talk now about the fact that, well, how much of an underdog can you really be when you have Seaver, Kuzman, Ryan, and Gentry, and a few of the other great pitchers, and then some terrific hitters like Cleon Jones, and Art hit 300 that season, but no, I mean they were underdogs, and they went up against one of the great teams of all time, the Baltimore Orioles in the series. The Braves were stacked offensively and actually really took it to Seaver and Kuzman in that playoff series. And then all season long, they battled the Cubs and had to overcome that 9.5 game lead. And the Cubs had 4 or 5 Hall of Famers, if you include Leo DeRocher. So, but Al Weiss, a game against Chicago, had a home run, and then another game against Chicago, he had a home run. And then, of course, in Game 5, hitting a big home run just out of the blue. I think he had 10 home runs his entire career, and he had 4 of them in the '69 season, including the one in the World Series. So obviously, he overachieved when the spotlight was the brightest, and certainly was an inspiration, I think, to everyone that, whether you were Seaver or Jones or Kuzman or the 25th guy on the bench, you can make a difference. And I think in that respect, Al Weiss was really inspiring.
So it's interesting too, because you really paint the picture of the way Gil Hodges used the platoon beautifully, and kind of counter that with the fact that Leo DeRocher used his regular so much that he drove him into the ground. That came September, they were shot. But the question is for you, Art, you take a look at the season you were having. You're 27 years old. You're in the prime of your career. You're hitting 300, all right? But yet you're platooning. Now, I know that whenever I speak to any athlete in any sport, deep down, they believe they're good enough to play every single day. How difficult was it to give into the greater good of the team to be part of that platoon with Rocky? And the numbers the two of you put up were, a superstar numbers. How difficult is that to put ego aside, and how important was Gil in allowing all those players to put ego aside to be able to achieve the maximum outcome from that roster?
Well, I think one of the brilliant things about Gil Hodges is that he managed by feel. He was a guy that, unlike most of the managers today, with the printouts and the sabermetrics, he had a feel for the game, and he managed that way. He knew about everybody on his team, from the guy at the very end of the bench, and he knew at some point he was going to need them to help us win. And so that was Gil's strength. In my case, it was very frustrating. I had a great playoffs against Atlanta, and I had 3 hits the first game, 3 hits the second, 1 in the third. We swept them. Now we go into the World Series, and they had 3 right-handed starting pitchers, and our starting pitchers didn't pitch well, so we had to score a lot of runs in that playoff series. Now we go into Baltimore. They've got 2 starting left-handed pitchers, and I don't start the first game. I'm on a pretty good roll, and I understood it. Both Ronnie Swoboda and I, who shared right field, understood the situation. But it was very frustrating. Here's the thing that really is interesting, and a lot of people don't realize this. I didn't start the first game, but Gil sent me up to pinch hit with the game on the line against the left-hand pitcher with 2 outs in the 9th inning. And I've mentioned this to Erik, and we wrote about this in the book. I grounded out to second base with Davey Johnson, who Erik ended up writing a book with. But I think about that at-bat every day of my life, because I could have been a hero, and turns out we won the series. But that one at-bat kind of is so vivid in my mind. But Gil had enough confidence in me to send me up. I think I was a tying runner, tying batter, and I think he felt that if I could hit a home run, that I was able to do that. So I knew he had confidence in me, but it was very frustrating for me to be able to play 2 or 3 days in a row, sit down, not play, et cetera, et cetera. And the other thing, I think, in the long run, it hurt our careers. For myself and Swoboda, Clendenin, Cranepool, Weiss, Boswell, and Garrett and Eddie Charles, and even platoon sometime behind the plate with J.C. Martin and Jerry Grody. But I think
even Duffy Dyer a little bit too.
Hurt us a little bit because you get labeled, and that's unfortunate. But I think what really was the bottom line is that all of us respected Gil so much, and he never shied away from telling us exactly what was on his mind, and that was the honesty he had. And I think with all the respect we had for him, we did it, and it worked out great that year. And in reality, everybody got a chance to play. And again, everybody on that team is remembered. Everybody knows, fans know the names of everybody because everybody contributed.
I'll start with Erik on this question, then go to Art. Last week, SNY replayed the 1969 World Series. So, Erik, did you watch it? And what jumped out at you, having seen it now? When was the last time you watched it? And preparing the book, maybe you watched some videos of it. And Art, next, when was the last time you watched any video of the games, and what jumps out at you now? We'll start with Erik.
Okay, so I did watch some of it, and the difference watching it now as opposed to maybe 5 or 10 years ago, which I did on YouTube. You can watch it there too, is the fact that I know what these guys were thinking out there. Because when we, interviewed all the living guys, all the living players, executives, and groundskeepers, and wives, and so forth, but the players especially, we went really deep with these guys, and we asked them, what were you thinking at this moment? And some of the answers were really surprising. And I mean, Jerry Koosman, for example, in that last inning of Game 5, he was nervous as hell. Now you look at him out on the mound, and he looks like he has total command. And Art and I, we kind of refer to him as like the John Wayne on the team. He kind of carries himself that way and has a swagger, and the way he thinks, the way he talks, and he's really, truly one of the funniest guys I've ever met in baseball too. So out on that mound in the 9th inning, he pretty much threw nothing but fastballs. because he was so nervous. And he knew that was risky, especially with some of the hitters the Orioles had up. And one of them that he names is Davey Johnson, who, just missed tying that game. Art mentioned, I did the book with Davey, and Davey to this day thought the ball was out of the park. Probably much in the same way that Piazza thought that his home run was probably out of the park in Game 5 against the Yankees in 2000. There's just something about left center where hard hit balls go to die, I guess. But just knowing stuff like that, the short answer, we got on inside these guys' heads when we interviewed them. And so watching that World Series, not only do I get to watch these guys, but I knew what they were thinking. And that's a neat dynamic.
Art, did you happen to catch it? And I don't know if they're showing SNY in Florida.
Well, I didn't see the SNY. I did do an interview with Howie Rose when they played Game 3. I did a half-hour interview leading into that game, so I knew it was on, and I didn't see the World Series games. Quite honestly, the World Series games, while it brings back great memories in terms of us winning, I was 0 for 6 in the World Series. So I didn't want to see the 0 for 4 in Game 3, the last out in Game 1, and then pinch hitting could have been a hero, I think, in Game 4 or 5. I'm not sure which game that was. So those games, I'm so glad we won and so happy to have been part of it. But I've seen enough 0 for 4s in my life, so I didn't want to see another one. But they're such great memories for the fans. And the reality of it is the playoffs, you don't see much footage of them at all. They kind of gloss over it. People talk about us winning 3 straight from the Braves and then going right into the World Series. I'm not sure why you don't see a lot of footage from that playoff series, but the World Series is still so vivid in people's memories, and again, it's great that they replay them because it does bring back some happier times, and I'm glad that we're able to kind of, in this world we're living in right now, make people feel a little bit better and smile about some things.
It's also interesting. You mentioned some of the great moments in the '69 season. Obviously, also the men landing on the moon, but the Cubs were such a big part of that season for the Mets as well. Two games in particular: the imperfect game, the near no hitter. You were not in the lineup that day. Ron was in right field, but you got a front row seat sitting in the dugout. You also, if memory serves me right, were in the dugout for Jim Maloney's no-hit 10-inning game. What were the differences between those two earlier in your career and then, fast forward 4 years watching Seaver on the mound? What were the takeaways from those two games?
Well, Jim Maloney was a terrific pitcher for the Reds, could really throw hard. Pitched 2 no-hitters, if I'm not mistaken, that particular year. Got beat by one in New York when Johnny Lewis hit a home run, I believe, in the bottom of the 10th, and then had a no-hitter against somebody else that year. But Jim Maloney could really throw hard, but he wasn't the pitcher that Tom Seaver was. I mentioned this a number of times to people that when I played against Tom, and I was 2 for 2 against him, I hit a pinch hit home run off of him in one of the games in 1967. He was winning 7-0. I hit a 3-run home run in the 9th inning at Shea Stadium. And he ended up winning the game 7-3. We never talked about that, though, when I got over to the Mets. We never brought it up, and I never brought it up. But
even in Napa, you never brought it up?
No, I never brought it up.
No,
no, I didn't want him to throw us out of his house in Napa. We were there for a week. But I got a chance to play against him and play behind him. And in right field, when I got a chance to play, I knew how great a pitcher he was. But I really saw the greatness in Seaver when I was playing first base when he was pitching. Just being that close to him, watching him wind up, and just his mannerism. He was I think history will show he's one of the greatest pitchers ever to pitch in the major leagues, and rightfully so. But he was such a great pitcher, and both of them had great stuff. Seaver was such a tough competitor. Never wanted to come out of the game. He would, if he was, pitching today, I can't imagine a manager taking him out of the game in the 5th or 6th inning. But that was an era that everybody pitched complete games with Marichal and Koufax and Drysdale and Gibson and Ferguson Jenkins and on, Carlton. And but Seaver was a much better and to take nothing away from Jim Maloney, Seaver was a much better pitcher, and as witnessed by all his wins and incredible statistics that he's had. But to play behind him, you had to be on your toes every pitch. He was in and around the plate all the time, and although he did get hit hard in Game 1 of the World Series, or somewhat hard, and then in the playoffs in 1969, I probably can put up 3 or 4 fingers to talk about the number of times I really saw him get hit hard. And I did an interview with somebody for a paper about 2 or 3 weeks ago when it was an anniversary of the game. He struck out 10 in a row at Shea Stadium, and I was in right field and caught a fly ball by I think it was Cito Gaston. That was the second out in the 6th inning. We were playing San Diego, not thinking anything about it. It was second out, and then he ended up striking out the next 10 in a row. So I was the last person to touch a ball in that game, and he struck out everybody. And so there's so much greatness in his ability to pitch, and I think he's won so many awards and deservedly so. But I think when we went out to talk to him, Erik got a feel about how important he was to that team and how great he was for pitching for the Mets. And just to get back to your original question, even though they both had great arms, Jim Maloney and Tom Seaver really and truly was a much better pitcher.
The other great moment against the Cubs, Erik, I have to imagine when there's such an iconic moment in sports history, when you have to write about it, the pressure must be immense. So the moment I'm talking about, obviously, is the Black Cat. When you set out to write about that, was it nerve-wracking? Because it is such an important moment in that season.
Well, Erik, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, the question was to me, right?
Yeah.
Oh, so as a writer, no, I mean, you're not nervous at all about capturing a big moment. You just want to make sure you get it right. You want to make sure that you're getting the story from all angles, which I thought that we did. I mean, again, going back to Art's relationship, plural, and all the people that he remains in contact with, where you could talk about the Black Cat and talk to the head groundskeeper, or one of the groundskeepers, because Art has their phone number. I mean, who has that?
That's good or bad.
No, I mean, it's extraordinary. So when you ask me, well, were you nervous about capturing that? Well, not with those sources, because you're going to get it from all angles, not just from the Mets dugout, but also from the groundskeepers and the media, and if we wanted to, Art could have gotten on the phone and we could have talked to Fergie Jenkins or somebody like that. So having a co-author like Art made my job easy, as far as working with Art to paint the right pictures. And I'll just say this, Art, whenever we do a book signing, he's very flattering, and he says a lot of nice things about my writing. Art is a very good writer in his own right, and every step of the way, I mean, he read every page that we wrote together, and we discussed changes every step of the way to make this book as authentic and as good as it could be. But to answer your question, no, I wasn't nervous at all. There were so many highlights to that 69 season that we had to get just right, because there were probably 10 or 12 monumental moments. But with the resources that we had, it made it a lot easier for me.
It's interesting. What people don't realize is the Black Cat pass in front of Ron Santo in that game. And that at bat that Santo had in that game, he drove in the only run the Cubs that game after the Black Cat passed in front of him. But obviously they lost the game, and the rest is history. But it is pretty neat. We all just think of that Black Cat, and that whole September series. But Santo did get the only RBI in that game, which is pretty funny.
Well, what's really interesting about that particular game is that cat came from underneath the stands and just as easily could have walked over and peered into the New York Met dugout. And that would have freaked me out because I'm very superstitious. But that cat had the presence of mind to walk around the on-deck circle and just kind of stare into the dugout. And it looked like he was staring at Leo DeRocher, which was eerie to begin with. And so, as Erik said, it was a game that is so vivid in our memories, but one of many games that year that stand out. I mean, you could pick the Carlton 19 strikeout game where Swoboda hit two runs and struck out the other 2 times at bat. You could pick out the doubleheader in Pittsburgh where we won 1-0 both games. The Bob Moose no-hitter. I mean, there was so many.
The West Coast, the whole West Coast trip.
West Coast trip is the one that sticks out in my mind as the turning point. We've talked about this before. I remember the games weren't televised. I remember I just finished my freshman year in college. I was home at night, and I would listen to the games and follow the games, and you just could feel the season turn as that trip went, and nobody could see it because the games weren't televised. It was on the radio.
No, those are a good point because those games were so important. And we historically, at least in '68 and in early '69, we did not play well on the West Coast. And we had terrible time against Houston, and even that year in '69. So that coast trip you're talking about was very, very important. I hated that the Candlestick Ballpark. That was the worst ballpark. And of course, Marichal and Perry and Bob Bolin and I don't know who else they had there, but they had a really good pitching staff. And then you went to L.A. and you had Koufax. Well, Koufax wasn't pitching them. You had Drysdale, Sutton, and Bill Singer. I mean, you had a bunch of great young pitchers there, except Drysdale was not young. But that West Coast, you had some tough pitching matchups, and then. In '69, San Diego was in the league, so that they weren't as tough as the other 2 teams. But that West Coast trip was very important for us in 1969, and it was just a matter of us just kind of again playing good baseball and winning some close games.
Just want to go back to the chat rooms. A couple of people have other questions. So this is from Mark Marinello. Did Don Buford's comments after Game 1 fire up the team at all?
Well, he hit the home run in the first inning, and as Buddy tells the story, he was rounding the bases, and he said to Buddy, "You ain't seen nothing yet." Buddy came in and kind of said that to everybody, and it kind of revved us up a little bit. We ended up losing the game anyway, but I thought that was interesting that he would say that they had won 108 games that season during the course of the year, and I think they beat Minnesota. Did they meet Minnesota that year, Erik? I'm not sure. You would know that.
They did. They beat the Twins. Yeah.
Yeah, and
Billy Martin's Twins.
Yeah,
that's right.
And they had every reason to think they were going to beat us, maybe in 4 in a row, because they had such a great team. I had played with Frank Robinson at Cincinnati, and I knew Frank, and he had had a great year for them over there, and had a terrific lineup. So when Buford said that, and Buddy told us about it, it kind of revved us up a little bit. And you always want to leave what's the phrase? You want to leave a sleeping giant sleeping. What is that? Something like that?
Let sleeping dogs lie, right?
Let sleeping dogs lie. Thank you. And so, not that we were sleeping dogs at the time. It was early in the game, but our first inning, and so. But I thought it was interesting he would say that, and we lost that first game, and here's the thing that's really important is that we won that second game, and nobody felt like we were going to fall apart after that loss in the first game because we had Koosman pitching in the second game, and Jerry was such a terrific pitcher, and of course Ron Taylor, who I mentioned earlier, saved the game in Game 2, but Koosman was such a great pitcher, and We called them in the book, Seaver was Van Gogh and Koosman was Patton. And that's the way I looked at those two guys. Seaver was the great artist, and Koosman, you wanted Koosman with that ball because he was going to do anything to help you win. And as witnessed by how great he pitched that game. And then, again, Ron Taylor saved it. But Jerry was a terrific pitcher. So we all had confidence that we were going to come back after that first game loss. And if we don't win that second game, we're liable to lose 4 in a row. But Jerry came through, and it was an important game for us to win that second game in the World Series.
It's funny, I'm watching it now. You see the game 1, the lead-in, where Kurt Gowdy is talking about the Orioles, and it kind of really gave you guys no chance. It was, he says, this is the best team in baseball. Then he kind of backtracks and say, well, the Mets were the best team in the National League, but it was clear he thought that you guys were going to be swept. Another question from the chat room, Mark Taglione from Mets Fantasy Camp, one half of the Taglione brothers. Art Shamsky got the first ever National League championship base hit. What were his thoughts about the new alignment in 1969, which involved league championship series? That's right. It was the first year of the new divisions. What were your thoughts going into that season with the new alignments and that first playoff series?
Well, it was a new thing for all of us. We just didn't know how it was going to work out, and we were playing a really good Atlanta Brave team. Although I think their record that year was not as good as ours. I'm not sure what it was, but I don't think their record was as good as ours. But they had, I mentioned that lineup before with Aaron, Cepeda, Rico, Cardi, Felipe Alou. They just didn't have the pitching that we had, so we knew that we could compete with them. There was no doubt about that. The ironic thing is that all our pitchers, all starting pitchers, did not pitch well in that series, and the left-hand batters in this platoon system really came through, and that was so great for all of us. But it was a new thing; it was a new venture. They had expanded that year, and we were all kind of feeling our way through, and we really laid the groundwork for subsequent expansion and playoff series and what's going on now. Well, hopefully it will be going on in baseball.
So this is, this person probably doesn't have the book, but I know there is a great Ken Boswell story. So Glenn Mallett is asking any memorable Boswell stories from Art, and I know it probably includes binoculars, if I remember the book correctly.
Yeah, Kenny was my roommate, and you talk about two guys from different parts of the world. Kenny was from outside Austin, Texas. I'm from St. Louis. We kind of met when I got over to the Mets and really liked each other. And again, from two different worlds. And I love the guy to death. I always tell him to this day, hopefully before it's too late, that he pays me back some of the room service money that I laid out for him. He never seemed to have money for it. He never felt like signing the check or paying for it. So I always kid him about it. But he was a great guy, and we got along great. I do remember he was a single guy living in Manhattan and loved it, and he was a happy-go-lucky guy. And I remember one game we were playing, and Nolan Ryan was pitching, and I was playing first base, and Nolan at that time, this particular game, couldn't throw strikes. He was 3-2 on everybody, and when he did throw a strike, the best these guys could do was foul it off, and the game's going on and on and on, and Kenny's playing second base, and we're getting ready. He's got the ball in his hand, and Kenny said, "Nolan," he yells into Nolan and kind of walks toward him in the mound. He says, "I've got a date tonight in the city. Can you please hurry up and throw some strikes?" And Nolan turned around and peered at him like he was really angry. But I thought it was really funny that Kenny would say that, and it was just funny at the time. Maybe he had to be there, but I thought it was pretty funny.
So, you take a look at the aftermath, and you alluded to, your entire career, but so many people remember you for 69. You look at the aftermath of that 1969 season. Let's start with the ticker tape parade. What was that like, knowing, that sea of people and what you actually did for New York? When you're on the field, you don't realize what's going on in the city and the surrounding areas. But when you saw that outpouring of love during, that ride through the Canyon of Heroes, what was it like for you?
Well, again, it was such a turbulent time. And even though we were all caught up in our own world of playing baseball and going to the stadiums and coming home, we knew what was happening in the outside world. There was so much so many problems. And again, I mentioned the war in Vietnam, but the city of New York was in total disarray, politically, financially, morally, socially, assassinations and what have you in 68, 69, so many bad things happening. And as we started to start winning in August and September, we felt how the fans were not only the true Met fans who had stayed with us in those bad times in the early part of that year, but all the fans who were now caught on this train of winning that we're starting to do. And I think that this was a culmination. This parade was a culmination of how excited they were about being there for us to win. And over the years, I probably had 100,000 people tell me they were at the final game on October 16th, 1969. And
I was.
I say to myself, that ballpark held 53,000 people. So somebody's not telling the truth. But if they were there in their own mind, then that's fine. But that parade was such a great experience to be out there and look at the adulation and the love that these people had for all of the members of that team and the whole organization. And it was just an incredible time to be on top of the world. We were on top of the world. I mean, about a week later, they took 7 of us to Vegas, and we were in a show in Vegas. I don't remember if we were before that or after the parade. We were on the Ed Sullivan show, and making fools of ourselves, singing "You Got to Have Heart." Here it is, right there.
Wow,
You Got to Have Heart. That nobody knew the words to.
It was not particularly well done, but it's worth seeing.
Yeah, if you're looking at that photo, I'm at the bottom left with that triple blazer that I've got on, and trying to figure out if I can remember the words or not. But it was such fun with Ed Sullivan, and then they took 7 of us to Vegas to be in a show at Caesar's Palace, and we made fools of ourselves singing "Impossible Dream" twice a night, and so many things happened to us in the course of right after we won, but the parade was a culmination of everybody just loving us to death because of what we had accomplished.
So I have to ask this one. I've told Mark the story. I worked with somebody who at the time in 1969 was John Lindsay's chief of staff. And he takes credit for getting Lindsay reelected by shoving into your locker room to celebrate. I think when you won the Pen or maybe the World Series, to have champagne poured. What was the feeling in the clubhouse, in the locker room, when the mayor came in to get champagne poured on him?
Well, he had lost the bid, I think in September.
He was running a liberal
as a Republican. Yeah. He had lost. So now, with us winning, I think I'm not even sure he was going to even try to get reelected. But with us winning, he decided to run as a liberal. What was it? I'm not even sure. A liberal.
Liberal line, yeah, which was a separate party.
And so there's a great photo of him at one of the celebrations where Rod Gaspar is pouring champagne on that $300 suit that he's got. He was a very good dresser and a very smart, bright guy, a nice man. But he was there for all the celebrations. And after losing in the primary, he ended up winning a re-election in November, which was almost an impossible thing to even think that he would be able to do. But it proved to you how winning and being in this atmosphere of success that really helped him. And I'm not sure he would, if he was around today, would even admit that was the case. But I think anybody with any common sense knows that he was smart enough to be there when we won in all the celebrations, and ended up reaping the benefits of those successes.
So this question is in the chat room. It's something that AJ and I have dedicated many of our radio shows to. The question from Jeff Cohn: what would you tell the Golden Era committee to elect Gil Hodges to the Hall of Fame?
Well, there's no doubt in my mind that he should be in the Hall of Fame. He obviously he died at a young age and didn't have a chance to really kind of have much more success as a manager of the Mets. And I do believe they would have won more championships. I put a number on it, I just don't know. But I do think Gil would have been a great manager and would have had more success. Here, the thing about Gil is that if you look at his statistics as a player, look at his statistics against Tony Perez, Ron Santo, Orlando Cepeda. He's right up there with either home runs or RBIs, and certainly was an important part of the great Brooklyn Dodger teams. He didn't have the great batting average, and he had the one really non-productive World Series. But I do believe Gil, for what he did as a manager of that 69 team and as a player, deserves to be in. But here's the thing that I'm really confused about. There was one year, and maybe Erik knows the year, I'm not sure, where he missed being elected. He had to have 75% of the writers' votes. He missed by a small percentage, like 74 point something. He just missed. But the 3 or 4 or 4 or 5 guys behind him in that particular year all eventually made it into the Hall of Fame, and Gil is still trying to get in. So I find that really to be really kind of a strange situation. I know he's on a committee this year, although I don't even know if they'll even have that era committee again this year because of what's going on. But I'll do whatever I can to help and whatever PR I can do. But I do think it's a shame that he's not in. And if we could talk about the Hall of Fame, that would be another couple hours, because my views on the Hall of Fame now are not the same as a lot of people, because I do think that they've kind of really opened it up and watered it down a little bit. And I don't want to disparage anybody for making it. That's not what I'm trying to do. I just think that when I was a youngster and growing up and even as a player, and I saw some of these guys go in that I thought that I idolized, who I thought were well deserved. And then I've seen players that go in that I, on a personal level, didn't think they were Hall of Fame players. And again, I don't want to disparage anybody, but it's a different world now. So now with the voting of the era committee and some other ways that guys get in, maybe there's a chance Gil would get in.
You opened the door a little bit there, so I'm gonna kick it in a little bit. First, we've had shows and we've had different theories as to why Gil never made it on some of those committees early on. Was evidently a lot of the people on those committees were very good friends with Ted Williams, and there was some animosity because, of the way Gil, with the Senators came in and did a better job than Ted, and so it seemed like Ted put some whispered in a few people's ears. That's one of the theories. But you mentioned some players that you believe belong in the Hall of Fame. And early in your career, you were a teammate of Pete Rose. Does Pete Rose belong in the Hall of Fame?
I get that question all the time, and I played a number of years with Pete. We were best of friends. We're still friends. We started our minor league careers in 1960 up in a small town upstate Geneva, New York, and we played again in Macon, Georgia. 2 years later in the Sally League, and then we were together in the big leagues. It's such a difficult question because the one thing that is a no-no in baseball, and every locker room's got it, is a big sign in there, a big painting, whatever you want to call it, or a big announcement about gambling. That's the one no-no. You can commit murder and stay in the game. You can be a drug dealer and stay in the game, but gambling is the one no-no. And I do believe that if he would have come clean about whatever situation he had, whatever problems he had, and just was honest about it, he not only would be in the Hall of Fame, he'd be managing or an owner of a team. My feeling is that anybody that's got more hits than anybody in the history of the game, an all-star at 4 or 5 positions, definitely should be in the Hall of Fame. But here's the sad part I feel about it, and sadness I feel that when I hear people talk, 99.9% of the people who don't want Pete in, and it's borderline 50-50. You get a lot of people who never don't want him. There's a lot of people that think he should be, but 99.9% of the people who don't want him in wish everybody played the game like he did. And that's the sadness I feel about when we talk about Pete Rose. I don't think we'll see it in our lifetime. I think he's alienated too many people, but he still has the records and still has the charisma and played the game as hard as anybody who ever played. And so when I see guys go in who I look at, and this is certainly subjective. I don't want to disparage anybody. I look at it and I say, I'm not sure they should be in the Hall of Fame. And then I look at a guy who has had more hits than anybody, and again, an all-star in a number of positions, and played the game like he did. I question the credibility of it all. So I just don't know I don't think we'll see it in our lifetime.
So how do you feel about asterisks? I'm thinking of the steroid guys. Maybe they get it, maybe they don't. The the Barry Bonds, people like that. Do you think there should be a sort of an asterisk room? Here they are, they're Hall of Fame ball players, but.
I think what's going to happen is that as the older riders fade out and the younger riders have more opportunity to vote, I think you're going to see those guys in the Hall of Fame. It's just a natural. The younger guys, the younger riders who don't look back in the history of the game. It's not as important to them as it is to some of us and some of the riders before us. I think they'll look at it strictly as statistics, and I think they'll eventually get in Clemens, Bonds. I don't know who else we're talking about. McGuire, I'm not sure. Sammy Sosa, I don't think so. But some of the guys who are well known, I think they will get in. My views on it are and that's another program for another day. I'm not sure how I feel about it. Maybe there will be asterisks there, but
A-Rod's another one.
I do know this, that when baseball had to strike in '94 and they lost the World Series and baseball was really down, the guys that carried the game were McGuire and Sosa and what's the shortstop's name at Baltimore with
Ripken.
Ripken had the consecutive game streak. Those guys really kept the game alive, and there has to be some merit for that. I look back in that asterisk with an asterisk in terms of that period of time, and players are certainly to blame for whatever stigma they have on them. But we look back at the owners and the commissioner of baseball and see what they did. They stuck their head in the sand and they whitewashed that whole thing because the game was in trouble, and they looked at it as an opportunity to take advantage of something that was going on. And we could talk about that at another time, but there's blame around for everybody there.
Right, absolutely. The hypocrisy is that Bud Selig, the commissioner of baseball, while all that was going on, is in the Hall of Fame, and the guys who hit the home runs. And listen, I'm not a big proponent of having those guys with the steroids in the Hall of Fame, but for Pete, to me, it's an entirely different story. His gambling is an addiction and it's a sickness. I don't think he can control it. You're right. He alienated a bunch of people. I don't believe he ever bet against his team. I don't believe he ever threw a game, because of it. Yes, it's the number one rule in baseball, but I believe he should be in the Hall of Fame exactly for what you said, for what he did on the field. Just one more question from the chat room, because I think it kind of segues nicely to what you said about when baseball came back after the strike. Obviously, we're waiting for baseball to come back. Most likely, it's not going to be with fans. It's going to be a very difficult. I mean, as much as we want to see baseball, it's going to be different when watching it on TV. In spring training this particular year, before everything was put on hold, ESPN started experimenting with microphones at first base. So this is a great question to that end. Who was the most interesting opponent you ever had a conversation at first base with? Because now a lot of those are going to be public. So who was the most interesting opposing player you had a conversation with ever?
Well, I was so lucky when I played first base to play against the greatest players some of the greatest players in history of the game. I mean, I got a chance to say hello to Mays and to Aaron and Clemente, McCovey. I mean, just for those guys to acknowledge that I existed was to me really great. But I remember one day Henry Aaron got on first base and Gil went out to talk to the pitcher. I don't remember all the circumstances, but I walked over to Hank and I said, Hank, how does it feel to know you're going to get 3 hits every game? Because I thought he was getting 3 hits every game. He looked at me like he never made an out. We know he did and everything. And he said, he smiled at me. He said, I don't know if I'm going to get 3 hits today, but if I don't today, I'm most likely going to get 3 tomorrow. So he made me feel like, he never worried about an 0 for 4, like I had to worry about an 0 for 4 if you're going to play the next day. So he was such a great ball player. And Mays, I mean, I got a chance to say hello to all those guys. And to me, that was a big thrill. I'm very lucky. I get, this question. One of the questions I get is, don't you wish you were playing now and making all that money? And my standard answer is, what are you, crazy? Of course I do. But would I trade it for the World Series ring? No. But the other thing that I think is important is that I got a chance to play with and against, in my opinion, the greatest conglomerate of players in the history of the game. If you look from the middle of the 60s to the early 70s, just in the National League with Mays, Aaron, Clemente, Koufax, Drysdale, Billy Gibson, Billy Williams, Stargell. All these great players. We could go down we could go down the list of all the, and that's just the National League, and Bench and Rose and those guys at Cincinnati and Perez. I mean, Frank Robinson. I mean, I consider to name all these guys, and I got a chance to be part of that era. And so for me, it was really a thrill. It's still a thrill to be able to say I played in that great area. And so I wouldn't trade it for they make a lot of money now. There's no doubt about it. But I got a chance to play with great players and play on that championship team. So for me, I'm living the life, living the true life of a kid who dreamt to be in the big leagues.
All right, before we let you go, let's get the name of the book out there one more time. New York Times bestseller. It's been out for a while. After the Miracle, The Lasting Brotherhood of the 1969 Mets, Erik Sherman and Art Shamsky. But Art, you also have a new venture starting up probably next week. You want to tell everyone about it? Yeah,
I'm starting a podcast. I'm trying to get it up by either tomorrow or Friday, if not early next week. My first guest was Eddie Craneville. I just discovered this great name to name it, the Art Shamsky podcast. And I'm really looking for it. I got Eddie because it's around the 1 year anniversary of when he got the kidney transplant. And I just wanted to talk to him about how he feels and try to get some funny stories that he hasn't talked about before. And I think we found it and got some. And so hopefully that'll be up, like I said, either the end of this week or the beginning of next week. And I'm looking to do, I don't want to just do baseball. I want to do some entertainment and some other sports things. I just want to make people smile and laugh a little bit. I'm not going to do hardcore political and hardcore stuff. It's just not in my nature. So hopefully it'll be a fun thing and trying to get some laughs and some new fun thing for people to smile about.
Yeah, it's definitely not your first venture into media. People probably don't even remember this, but Ron Swoboda went into sportscasting. You were on Sports Extra for how many years? 9
years in Sports Extra. I did the Mets games. I did the Mets games in 79, 80, and 81 when they were really a bad team. It was tough broadcasting, but I got a chance to work with Ralph Kiner and Bob Murphy and Steve Albert and a lot of fun times. And it wasn't great baseball, but it was great experience. And worked at WFAN for a while. Did some stuff for ESPN. And so anyway, thank you, Mark, for bringing up the podcast. I appreciate it. It's always great to see Erik. And again, he did such a great such a great job with the book and After Miracle, but he's also done such a great job with all the other books he's written in. So and he's got another one coming out. I'm going to plug your new one. So why don't you talk about that real quick?
Two Sides of Glory. It's about the '86 Red Sox. Much the same formula that I used for Kings of Queens, the book with the '86 Mets, where I travel around the country and I meet with the key and more intriguing members of the '86 Red Sox to get the other side of the story for all your Mets fans that are watching today, Mark and AJ. And so I just received the manuscript back from the copy editor. So I'm reading the book for probably the 18th time, and which is what you have to do, as you well know, to make sure everything's right. And so that'll be coming out next March.
Oh, all right. So we'll have you on our show way before then, as we always do. But guys, thanks so much, Art. Again, over and above the 69, but without a doubt, my Met orange and blue in my blood comes from that 1968 home grand slam off of Nelson Briles. But for many years in my mind, I thought it was Bob Gibson until I actually, when we were writing the book and I actually looked at the box score, I said, wait a minute, I thought it was Seaver Gibson. How was it Seaver Briles?
Yeah, it was Nelson Briles. I remember it was a Saturday afternoon. If I think hard enough, I could probably tell you the temperature, but it was a great time for me at that time. It was my first year with the Mets, and who knew a year later we'd win the World Series, and I'm still in New York because of it. But thank you so much for having me on, Mark. And just one quick addendum: if anybody wants to follow me on Twitter, they can follow me at Art Shamsky and go to my website www.artshamsky.com and they can stay in contact with me.
Awesome. And Erik, same. What's your Twitter handle for people to follow you at?
I think it's what is it? At Sherman9. I think that's what it is. I'm not a big Twitter guy, but as you know, I'm a big Facebook guy. So that's where I do a lot of my interactions.
And that's easy. It's Erik Sherman. So
Yeah, and actually, I have a website. Here we go. ErikShermanBaseball.com.
awesome. All right, guys, stay safe, stay healthy, and we appreciate you coming on. And,
Great,
and you know, giving some people to watch something other than the news for an hour. So thanks so much.
You did a great job. Thanks, Erik. Great to see you. AJ, thank you. Mark, great. Thank you.
All right,
Thanks,
be safe,
guys.
guys. Thanks so much. Erik Sherman, Art Shamsky. We'll be back with another episode of Facebook Live in the next couple of days. So, you know, keep watching for us. Have a safe one, everyone.